All right, let's just jump right in. You can feel it, right? AI is everywhere. It's just changing the fabric of everything. But the real question, the one everyone's really asking, isn't if it's going to change the world, it's when.
So yeah, what is the real timeline here? I mean, are we talking a few years? A few decades? What's the deal? That's what we're here to do, to try and map out that road ahead. All right, so let's get into it. And fair warning, we're going to do something a little bold here. We're actually going to try and put a timestamp on the future. Think of it like a speculative 3-act countdown, say for the next 20 years or so, based on everything that's happening right at this very moment.
Okay, so first up is what we're calling phase 1, the slow burn. And this is the part that covers right now, today, all the way up to about 2030. And here's the kicker, we're already in it. This isn't some future prediction, it's our current reality.
So here's the whole roadmap laid out for you. You can see the 3 phases pretty clearly. First, there's the slow burn, which, like I said, is happening now. Then things get, well, intense. A whole decade of what we're calling the Great Restructuring. And then finally, after 2040, a totally new paradigm emerges. A new world.
So what does this slow burn actually feel like on the ground? Well, it all boils down to a pretty cold, hard calculation for any business owner. You've got the cost of a human employee over here, salary, benefits, training, the whole shebang. And over here, you have the cost of an AI or a robot. And the hard truth is, as we get closer to 2030, the machine is just going to start winning that math problem over and over again.
And once that calculation starts tipping, well, you see the direct result, don't you? The first real wave of AI-driven unemployment. And we're not talking about a few scattered layoffs here and there. By the late 2020s, this becomes a systemic thing. It's going to hit everyone, from white-collar jobs like junior coders and designers to blue-collar jobs like truck and taxi drivers. And this is where things get really weird. It creates this bizarre economic paradox. On one hand, stuff gets super cheap. Thanks to AI, things like software, getting a ride, your phone, it's all going to cost less, which sounds awesome, right? But here's the other side of that coin. You get this thing called deflation, and you mix that with a whole lot of anxiety about whether you'll even have a job. Suddenly, it's a massive public concern and a giant headache for any government trying to manage the economy. So all this tension just keeps building and building, and that's what leads us to phase 2, the Great Restructuring. You know that old analogy about the frog in the pot of water? Well, the 2020s, that's the water slowly warming up. The 2030s, that's when the water hits a rolling boil. It's the point where a full-blown crisis happens and society is absolutely forced to act.
I mean, just look at that number, over 25%. Projections suggest unemployment could actually surge past that, which is higher than during the Great Depression. But here's the crucial difference. This time, it's not just hitting one sector of the economy. It's going to hollow out a huge chunk of the middle class. And when that happens, you're looking at massive, massive social turmoil.
And this right here, this is the engine that could drive the whole system off a cliff. It's called a debt deflation spiral, and it's a truly vicious cycle. Just think it through. A ton of people lose their jobs, so they stop spending money. When people stop spending, prices for everything start to fall. But the amount you owe on your house or your student loans, that number doesn't go down. So your debt feels way, way heavier, and that can lead to a wave of defaults and a full-on financial meltdown. But here's the thing about humanity, right? It's always at the point of the absolute greatest crisis that we somehow find the will to make a radical change. This transformation that's coming, we're not going to choose it because it's a nice idea. No way. It's going to be a forced move, a necessary response to just unbelievable pressure. It's survival. And survival is going to demand a completely new way of thinking about, well, everything.
So what does that forced response actually look like? Well, first, you're going to see ideas that used to be on the fringes, like universal basic income, suddenly become front and center, urgent policy. And to pay for it, governments will have no choice but to start taxing the machines, or rather, taxing the enormous profits from the AIs and robots. And even the central banks will have to completely reinvent what they do, probably funding this whole transition in ways we've never seen before.
Okay, so if, and it's a big if we can get through that storm,
we arrive at phase 3, a new paradigm. So let's step into the world of 2040 and beyond, a world where the fundamental rules of how society works have been completely torn up and rewritten. So what's the new normal? Well, it could be an age of just incredible abundance. Think about it. All the basics you need to survive, food, a roof over your head, getting from point A to point B, all of that stuff could become dirt cheap. Like barely more than the cost of the raw materials and the electricity to run the machines. Can you imagine that? That constant grinding anxiety about just making ends meet could, for the most part, just vanish. And when that happens, it causes this absolutely fundamental shift in what our economy even values. It stops being about who can produce the most stuff. That's all automated. Instead, the focus shifts to what we could call new scarcities. You know, the things that AI, no matter how smart, just can't fake. Things like a real human connection, a genuinely original idea, that electric feeling of being at a live show, or even just getting someone's undivided attention. Now, an economic shift that big, it naturally rewires our deepest values as a society. Just try to imagine a world where the first question you ask someone isn't, "So, what do you do for a living?" Because it's just not relevant anymore. Life could start to center around things like learning for the sake of learning, creating art, building communities. And education, it would stop being a factory for training workers and start being a place for cultivating purpose in people. Okay, now, before we all get carried away planning our post-2040 lives, we need to pump the brakes for a second. It's so important to remember this is a projection. It's not a prophecy. The future isn't some movie script that's already been written. There are huge wildcard factors out there that could completely flip the table on this whole timeline.
Let's just talk about 3 of the biggest ones. First, AGI. If true artificial general intelligence shows up, forget this 20-year timeline. Everything we've talked about gets compressed from decades into maybe just a few years. It changes the game completely. Second, and this is a big one, a major war or geopolitical conflict could just derail this whole process, maybe for good. But the third one, and honestly, this is the most critical one, is us, human choice. Because in the end, our decisions, the ones we make, are what will determine if we build a utopia or a dystopia.
So really the best way to think about the tension of the next 20 years is like a scissors gap. Imagine a pair of scissors. One blade is technology, and it's just moving at this blinding exponential speed. The other blade, that's us, our society, our politics, our institutions, and we adapt so slowly. And that gap widening between the blades, that's where the cut happens. That's the source of the crisis. But it's also the pressure point that could force us, finally, to evolve. Which, leaves us with the ultimate question, doesn't it? Is this crisis that seems to be coming? Is it some unavoidable disaster that we should all be afraid of? Or could it be the painful but absolutely necessary catalyst for a whole new beginning, a better one for civilization? The future isn't written. And what happens next? Well, that really depends on the choices all of us start making right now, today.